I'd like to welcome you to this presentation in the series of WORC pre-application topical videos. This video will provide an overview of WORC and what it funds, including eligible participants and allowable uses of funds, as well as partnership and registration submission requirements. I'm Molly Chamberlain from Chamberlain Dunn LLC, a consulting firm based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. Chamberlain Dunn has been working with DRA since round 5 of WORC. The DRA was established in 2000 as a formal framework for joint federal-state collaboration to promote and encourage the economic development of the lower Mississippi River and Alabama Black Belt regions. DRA's region encompasses 252 counties and parishes in parts of Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee. These topical webinars are presented on behalf of DRA to assist applicants with their WORC applications. So this session will take a deep dive into the populations and activities that the WORC initiative covers, and this is covering primarily pages 2 to 15 of the FOA. Today's objectives include provide an overview of the purpose and core principles of the WORC initiative, to discuss eligible participants, including priority populations for this round, and to discuss allowable uses of funds. And do note that all information in this presentation is updated to reflect FOA ETA 2408, which is round 6. So the purpose of the WORC initiative is to create economic mobility, address historic inequities for marginalized communities of color, rural areas, and other underserved and underrepresented communities, and connect workers who live or work in the Appalachian, Delta, and Northern border regions to stable, high-quality, family-sustaining jobs, enabling them to remain and thrive in these communities. WORC funds projects that provide or facilitate the delivery of employment and training services for eligible participants. So, who can apply and who can be served? The following entities are eligible to apply for WORC Round 6. So this includes government, state, county, city or township, special district, and Indian or Native American tribal, state or local workforce development boards, state or local education agencies and independent school districts, labor organizations, worker organizations, or labor management partnerships, institutions of higher education, which includes those that are public or state controlled, private, Hispanic serving, historically Black colleges and universities, tribally controlled colleges and universities. Indian and Native American tribally designated organizations, public and Indian housing, and nonprofits, and that is those both with and without 501c3 status. So in our experience, DOL will not advise on whether you are eligible. You must make that determination. We would encourage you to review pages 6 and 7 of the FOA for the complete list of eligible applicants. While funds can be spent on things besides direct participant services, and we'll get into that in just a moment, the people you're allowed to serve as participants with WORC funds fall into 3 categories: new entrants, dislocated workers, and incumbent workers who live or work in the NBRC, ARC, or DRA region. So we'll go into definitions for each one of these groups. First set of eligible participants for WORC are new entrants to the workforce. So this includes individuals who have never worked before or have been out of the workforce long enough so that it is as if they are entering for the first time. This may include, but is not necessarily limited to, formerly incarcerated individuals, the long-term unemployed, and others that fit this description. It also includes, consistent with federal and state wage and employment laws, youth who are currently enrolled in high school and are currently or will be eligible to be employed before or within 6 months after the end of the grant life cycle, as well as youth who have dropped out of school and are seeking their first full-time job. The next group of eligible participants is dislocated workers. These are individuals who were terminated or laid off, have received notification of termination or layoff from employment, or were self-employed but are now unemployed. There's a link on page 10 of the FOA that takes you to the legal definition of dislocated worker under the legislation that governs this program, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. The FOA also notes that you can work with your workforce development agency partners on this because they frequently interpret and apply this definition in their day-to-day work with DOL funds. Finally, eligible participants include incumbent workers. These are individuals who are employed but need employment and training services in order to secure full-time employment, advance in their careers, or retain their current occupations. It may also include workers who are paid low or medium wages and would benefit from upgrading their skills in order to retain employment or advance in their careers, as well as those who are currently working part-time. Within the eligible categories of new entrants, dislocated, and incumbent workers, applicants must prioritize historically marginalized populations and individuals, which can include, but is not necessarily limited to, women, people of color, justice-involved individuals, individuals with disabilities, veterans, individuals with limited English proficiency, individuals with a history of substance misuse or behavioral health conditions, and other marginalized populations or communities. Note, though, that all participants you serve must live or work in the region. You may train workers for remote jobs or jobs located outside the region if you can show it will not require participants to have to relocate outside the region. Note, too, that if you define your population more narrowly to the exclusion of other types of participants, Department of Labor will hold you to that. So in other words, if you say, for example, you'll specifically serve veterans who are dislocated workers, and you make it very clear that that is your service population, you cannot serve other dislocated workers or veterans who are new entrants or incumbent workers. So pay really close attention and be deliberate about how you word your target populations. If you mean to write it narrowly to the exclusion of other eligible categories, you're absolutely permitted to do that, but do just be aware that you will then be held to that scope of work you define for yourself, and you would need to be granted a scope amendment if you eventually wanted to serve other eligible populations. One final note here on participants. The session that one of the other sessions that we're recording includes some additional information on reporting requirements. But as you're thinking about defining your population, it is important to know that participant has a really specific definition for DOL grants. So a participant is a reportable individual at the individual record level, has been determined eligible to receive services at intake by you or a subrecipient, has received an employment or training service, and under WORC, participants can also receive supportive services that are necessary and reasonable to enable them to participate or to gain or retain employment. So when you talk about number of participants served as part of your grant application, then you need to recognize that you'll be asked to gather and report individual level data for every person whom you serve, and you'll also need to document at intake that the person is eligible to receive services under WORC guidelines. We have seen some organizations, when this is their first DOL grant, be caught a little by surprise at the depth of information required and the fact that in order to count someone as a participant, you or a subrecipient has to document their eligibility and then provide individual record level information in your quarterly reports. So not to scare you off from applying, just something that you should be aware of. So now you know who can hold the funds and who can be served as a WORC participant. What activities are allowable under WORC? Your project strategies, activities, partnerships, and results must be built around WORC's 3 focus areas, which are increasing access to good jobs, ensuring that residents can attain good job outcomes, prioritizing equity, which is prioritizing outreach to and enrollment of marginalized individuals or groups, sustaining impact, so providing benefits to the community and workers that continue after the end of the WORC grant period. So how specifically can you do that? The FOA lists 5 main categories of allowable activities, and then I want to mention a 6th that shows up later in the FOA under funding restrictions. Training and other employment-related activities, participant support services, employer services, strategic planning, equipment purchases, and renovations. And then the other activity that we'll talk about later is offering participant incentives for reporting on outcomes. The first set of allowable activities are training or other employment-related activities. Workforce training strategies may include, but are not limited to, activities such as work-based learning, For example, registered apprenticeship programs, customized or incumbent worker training, on-the-job training, internships, and related activities. See the training and employment guidance letter linked on page 11 of the FOA for more information here. Training and work-based learning can also include traditional classroom or virtual training. And projects may focus on other employment-related activities, which may include but are not limited to activities such as in-depth participant assessment and evaluation that is designed to identify barriers to employment and develop individual employment plans, career planning activities, including those using labor market information to help participants select careers that may lead to family-sustaining wages and benefits, job coaching and job matching, and employability skills training. Projects could include funding for stipends, wages, or other incentives to ensure participants can participate in the program and or obtain employment. Participant support services are also allowable under the WORC initiative. These are sometimes informally called wraparound services. They should be tailored to the specific needs of the participant, and note that their purpose is to support participants in their ability to participate successfully and or to gain or retain employment. So they may be provided to participants only, and as we talked about before, participants have to fall into those eligible categories that we discussed. Supportive services can include activities like transportation, childcare, or housing, counseling and mental health or strategies to address substance misuse, assistance with uniforms, work-related tools, laptops, and school supplies, etc., test and certification payments and fees, defraying some of an employer's costs to provide accommodations, financial counseling, emergency assistance to cover costs that interfere with training completion or employment. Page 12 of the FOA provides more on supportive services. One note I'll make here is that if you do plan to offer these types of participant support services, think through your organization's level of capacity and preparedness to do so, or think about how you might leverage partnerships or contracts to offer them. We have seen a few organizations do things like plan to offer something like childcare support, knowing how much of a barrier that can be, but then they don't really have a strong plan for how to do that, nor strong policies to be ready to actually administer that once participants start enrolling. Employer services are encouraged, particularly for local employers that are small to medium-sized businesses, to help in a wide variety of areas. So these may include technical assistance materials on improving job quality, such as adopting more competitive wage scales, establishing more predictable work schedules, examining benefits, creating opportunities for advancement, and adhering to non-discrimination laws. You can also provide services to employers who already offer good jobs to enhance their economic success. So this could look like providing technical assistance to support job quality, designing and disseminating toolkits and training for employers to be recovery-friendly workplaces, establishing peer coaching, counseling, and worksite mentoring programs, and creating or expanding registered apprenticeships, internships, and other programs, which can include subsidies of apprentice and intern wages. So see pages 12 to 13 of the FOA for more details on employer support services. Strategic planning is another allowable activity in round 6 of WORC, but do note that any activities proposed for strategic planning to support a broader implementation plan may not exceed either $100,000 or 50% of the grant award, whichever is less. Strategic planning activities should be designed to promote and support economic transformation to help ensure project outcomes will lead to sustainable employment opportunities for residents in proposed service areas. So plans could do things like assess the economic landscape to identify new or growing high-quality employment opportunities, including those that offer family-sustaining wages, benefits, and advancement opportunities, and worker voice. Convening partnerships, developing new strategies, or updating and enhancing existing plans, and helping a community diversify its industries. Community involvement in these plans is critically important. So convening activities may include, but are not limited to, convening community partners and leaders. Impacted workers and organizations representing those workers should be encouraged and supported to participate. identifying, mapping, and prioritizing a vision for the future, data analysis, which may include obtaining workforce and economic information, conducting asset mapping, conducting SWOT analyses, or things like this, aligning education, economic, and workforce strategies, identifying resources and sustainability, including developing a financial plan with measurable benchmarks on how grant funding will be spent, and identification of other resources needed for your project and its impact to be sustainable. Pages 13 to 14 of the FOA talk more about allowable strategic planning activities. Finally, WORC allows funding for capital expenditures, including equipment purchases and renovations, but there are caveats here. Capital expenditures are allowable only if they directly facilitate or address the employment and training needs of dislocated or other workers in the communities to be served. Expenditures also must follow the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements at 2 CFR Part 200 and DOL Supplemental Requirements at 2 CFR Part 2900. See page 14 of the FOA for more details here. If a project proposing capital expenditures is awarded, the grantee will be required to seek and receive written ETA approval in a subsequent modification request for all equipment purchases and renovations, which must include a demonstration of how the purchases and renovations will assist in successful employment and training of participants. Note that grant award itself does not constitute this prior written approval. For this grant, capital improvements may include improvements to buildings or equipment needed for training programs, as well as structural improvements or upgrades such as relocation, modification, retrofitting, or enhancement of things like interior load-bearing walls, interior floors, etc. Implementing or enhancing the IT infrastructure of a building that would be needed for training programs. Minor alterations, renovations, or rearrangements of building, facilities, or equipment, such as activities or costs associated with relocating, modifying, replacing, or adding items related to internal environments, for example, temperature or acoustics, and installation of fixed equipment like fume hoods and AV equipment. Renting or leasing space to be used for grant participation, education, training, and related activities, as well as altering or renovating such spaces, including renovations related to federal accessibility obligations requiring facilities to be accessible and usable for individuals with disabilities. New construction and property acquisition are not allowed. And note that the budget for allowable equipment purchases and renovations cannot exceed $100,000 or 50% of your budget, whichever is less, and that you will be expected to serve at least one participant during the implementation period. So see pages 14 and 15 of the FOA for more detail on equipment purchases and renovations. So this is not in the allowable activities section, but it is mentioned later in the funding restrictions section. I mentioned earlier that you will be required to collect, maintain, and report at the individual level on participant data. So WORC allows you to budget up to 1.5% of your total grant funds to offer gift cards and other incentive payments to participants for their time spent reporting on grant outcomes data that you cannot easily get through administrative records. So in other words, if you have access to things like employment retention or wages from other places, you need to go there first. But if you need to contact participants to get that information, you can budget for some limited funds to do so. And again, these incentives can be used for no other reason than to compensate participants for their time in providing information on grant outcomes after they complete training, for information not otherwise easily obtainable through administrative record, tied to the goals of the grant, and you must have policies and procedures in place for incentives like this. While we're talking about funding restrictions and you're thinking about project design and budgeting, you should also be aware that you can include indirect costs like a negotiated indirect cost rate or a cost allocation plan, or if you do not have either of those, you can use the de minimis rate of 10% of modified total direct costs. Subrecipient awards, although you should note that the department expects the lead applicant to have the organizational capacity to implement the project and it discourages pass-through awards where the lead applicant is only nominally involved in the operational aspects of the work. That section also mentions that you cannot spend money on or things that are non-allowable costs, and these are things like food, profit, and excessive salaries and bonuses. You can find this entire section starting on page 32 of the FOA. Okay, before we wrap up, there are a few other details we want to make sure that are on top of your thoughts as you consider putting together your application. The first is required partnerships. Eligible applicants must include partnerships with 3 types of partners. The first is at least 2 employer industry partners. The next type of required partner is the public workforce system, such as state or local workforce development boards, American Job Center operators, or partner programs. Where the applicant itself is one of these organizations, partnership is not required, but the applicant would need to provide documentation of its status as one of these organizations. Finally, applicants must include as a partner at least one organization representing the target community or communities covered by the project to ensure local participation and input are an integral part of project planning and execution, except where the organization is also, except where the applicant itself is one of these organizations. For each partner entity, the applicant must provide the names of the partner entities, location or community of each partner, role of each partner in the project, explaining planned activities and how those activities address the specific workforce needs identified by the employer industry partners, and services and/or resources that each partner will contribute to the project in the short term and for long-term sustainability. You also have to show as an attachment some kind of evidence that they have committed to your project. This could include a letter of support, memorandum of understanding, an email, something that would reasonably show a reviewer that they are not just a name on a page, but that they are ready and willing to do what is described in the proposal. There's also a list of optional partners on page 27 of the FOA, which could include labor unions, employer or industry networks, economic development organizations, local governments, regional planning organizations, higher education or other providers, supportive and human services providers, and others. Consider who will make your project stronger, who will help you access, especially those equity populations you must prioritize, and they may be added as partners as well. In order to apply, entities must be registered with SAM with a UEI and also registered with grants.gov. As a side note, in the event of award, any subrecipients must also have a UEI. The next few slides will provide a brief overview of these processes. SAM.gov, or the System for Award Management, is a web-based government-wide application that includes business information about the federal government's trading partners in support of contract awards, grants, and electronic payments. Registration is free, and it is also required for application submission. You may see ads or get emails from groups claiming to help you for a fee. Just note that it does not cost anything to register on SAM.gov nor to renew your registration. Registering with SAM.gov generates a unique entity ID, a UEI, which also is required for application submission. According to the SAM.gov website, new entity registration, i.e. for those entities not already registered with SAM, can take up to 10 business days after you submit your registration. So this is one of those things to start now. It does not commit you to applying, and it doesn't cost anything beyond time. As I just mentioned, applicants and subrecipients are required to have a UEI. The UEI is a 12-character alphanumeric ID that's assigned by SAM.gov. If your organization is already registered with SAM.gov, it already has a UEI. To get that UEI, log in, select the Entities widget, and you'll see your UEI on the left side. If your organization is not already registered with SAM.gov, start that process this week if you can. If you are not registered with grants.gov, this is also a process that you should start right away. To register, first create a user account, go to grants.gov and select register. Add a profile to associate with your organization and become an authorized organization representative for that organization. The AOR is authorized to submit grants on behalf of an organization. The request to become an AOR is sent to the eBiz point of contact from the organization's sam.gov account. The eBiz point of contact, which is a special login link on the grants.gov login page, logs in to authenticate the AOR role. If you are the eBiz point of contact and want to become the AOR, you need two grants.gov user accounts. One is the eBiz point of contact and another to establish AOR relationships. Just a few final reminders before we conclude. Additional videos are available at the website you see here. Start the UEI, sam.gov, and grants.gov processes ASAP. Technical questions should be submitted to the email address here, reference this FOA number, and include a contact name and phone number. And submit your applications by Thursday, June 20th, 2024, 11:59 p.m. Eastern, and they can be submitted only through www.grants.gov. And that's it for me. I'm Molly Chamberlain. You can reach me at the email address shown here, mc@chamberlaindunn.com. Note that the end of Chamberlain is L-I-N, no A, and I would be glad to answer any questions that I am able to do. And I wish you the best of luck on your application.